On this episode of Locked On Lightning, is the new additions to the team enough for a long run? Is Connor Sheary set to go on a run himself? As well as we got some big games on the horizon coming up. All that and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code Locked On NHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're talking about some of the new faces on this team. Obviously, they're Matt Dumba and Anthony Duclair. Now, we've spoken about them, but, really we haven't spoken about just yet. Are they enough for the Lightning to continue their winning ways, not only their winning ways, but also go ahead and possibly make a deep run in the playoffs, as well as a good ending to the regular season? As well as we're taking a look at Connor Sheary. He scored in his second consecutive game. We talk about him. Is he set to break through? Are we going to see the Connor Sheary that we signed up for? As well as wrapping things up with looking at those big games on the horizon for the Tampa Bay Lightning. How important are they and what they mean to possibly more success down the road? All that coming up. But first, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so subscribe to the channel there. Hit that notification button, and so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So we're jumping right into it. We're talking about, obviously, we spoke in the last episode, Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba came over during the trade deadline, had both very good games in their debuts at Amalie. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I think they were both two very surprising acquisitions that the Lightning had. I think we could all agree that those were moves that we did not see coming for this Lightning team. And I have to say, after just a not so superb move to start the deadline, I thought that Julien Brisebois really bounced back in a big way. Now, having said that, as excited as we are about these two players being in the lineup, and as well as they've played in their initial game, we need to remind ourselves it's still one game, and you still have a long road ahead of you, and we still have a long road ahead of us before we could really sit here and say whether or not these trade deadline acquisitions were anything of improvement to this team. Now, in theory, if you look at, especially if you're familiar with Anthony Duclair's game, you know that these guys both add multiple dimensions to this Lightning team, not only on the ice, but in the locker room, because like I've said, these guys have both been around for quite some time. And so they've really know the ups and downs of an NHL season. They know the ups and downs of when to try to get into the playoffs. Anthony Duclair, especially, he's gone from being on that Panthers team last year to this team this year back in San Jose, which was one of the most probably worst teams in the league. So he's really been on the highest of high and the lowest of low. So he knows both ends of that, where Matt Dumba, he goes from really, sorry to Wild fans, but I'm going to say it, goes to 10 years of really obscurity in Minnesota, and then goes out to Arizona, more really obscurity, if not just, having zero chance of going to the playoffs. And this guy, I will say, I think we've pretty much made the point for Duclair. I think that, what you see is what you get out of him. Even when he doesn't have the puck, you see that he just has such a big effect on his teammates, kind of like what we see from Kucherov and from Point, especially when those guys are rolling. And what you see from Matt Dumba, though, I think we need to kind of dive a little deeper in. And this goes hand in hand with, what are these two guys enough for a potential good run down this final stretch of the regular season? Matt Dumba, I think what you get in him is a guy that it's incredibly energized, that went from probably already making his golf plans in the offseason, penciling in vacations here and there, travel plans, to, oh crap, I actually might have to play in May and possibly June. Let's see how things go. And I think that's what you're going to get out of a guy. And I think that's the greatest thing that you could get from somebody at the trade deadline. Obviously, more times than not, you're going to get a player from a team at the deadline that is on a team that is not good, but that player is going to add value to your lineup, whether it be in depth or he's going to be a big-time player for you. I mean, we've seen it multiple times on this Lightning team over the years. I mean, the list goes on, really, of guys that the Lightning have brought in around the trade deadline and have really come from not so good situations and have really injected life into this team. If I need to, list some players, I will. Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, Nick Paul. Do I need to say more? Not saying that Duclair or Dumba are going to have, we could go even Savard coming from Columbus. The point is that you're getting a guy who is hungry. And I'm not saying the guys on this team are not hungry. That's not what it is. It's just you get someone that maybe hasn't been in this situation before. I mean, really, all the guys that I just listed, along with Dumba, have not been in this situation before. And to get a guy like that, who also is going to be able to help you clamp down defensively, that's a big, big acquisition. Now, I did state on the last episode, is Dumba going to be able to come back next year? Are the Lightning going to bring him back? I can't predict the future, but I will say for now, for those of you that are maybe wondering that right now, I think it's really all dependent on how he plays. If he plays well, if he blows us out of the water with his performance, I think that the Lightning are going to have no problem bringing back this guy to play on the third line. If he doesn't, and I don't think that was the intention too with this trade. I think Matt Dumba was just a throw-in. I think that really it's up to him. I think if he plays well, like I said, the Lightning will bring him back. Duclair, I think, is 100% coming back next year. And having said that, now that you start to wonder, how much better are these guys going to make this Lightning team? And I think that they take them from a place where they were teetering on missing the playoffs to now I could confidently say that they're going to be a wild card team. How much better are they going to be from that building spot? I can't really say. It really is all up to them, and we'll talk about that on the last half of the show, because it, as much as it is up to them as to where they finish up in the standings, at the same time, it's a tall order to ask of them, considering who they got coming up on the schedule, and towards the end of this month of March as well as all of April. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show as well. But coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about Connor Sheary. Starting to look like things are starting to click for him. Are we going to get the guy that we signed up for at the beginning of the year? We'll talk about all that and more coming up. But first, let's talk about our first sponsor of the show, and that is our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, we are we aren't even halfway. We are past the point of the halfway point in the NHL season, Lightning fans. And the Lightning are looking rejuvenated with these two acquisitions in Matt Dumba and Anthony Duclair. So regardless of where they are in the standings, though, I'm going to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. So all you have to do is pick guys like Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minuses, and more in a given game. So use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. Hit that thumbs up button. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. You know, we have some kind of like time to play with this week. The Lightning don't play till Thursday. So I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your comments, and I will react to all of them, time permitting. You know, we have tomorrow and we have Thursday to talk about all of that. So go ahead and get those comments and questions in. So we just got done talking about the new faces of Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba. Are they enough for a run? I think they're enough to get the Lightning into the playoffs. Are they enough to get them past the first round? That remains to be seen. You know, you can't just rely on two guys to get you down the stretch. It's a team effort for a reason. I know that sounds so cliche and I hate myself for saying it, but it's true. And one of the faces the Lightning are going to have to rely on is Connor Sheary. I mean, it's really every guy that suits up for this team is going to be relied on in some capacity. But Connor Sheary, I mean, he's been a massive disappointment this season through really, you know, you look at his stats thus far. He's played 47 games, 3 goals, 13 points. Not overly impressive, like I said. But listen, he's starting to look like he's starting to get it together. He's starting to figure it out. He notched his second straight game with a goal. He's got 2 goals and 3 points over his last 2 games. I know that may not sound that impressive, but with the season that this guy has had, really, when quite honestly, I've been ripping him all season and I've comparing him to Vlad Nemestikov. I hopefully none of you remember that because you blocked that out of your mind. But Nemestikov was in a similar situation. I think his contract was maybe a little higher than Sheary's. I'm not entirely sure about that. But I think that when you bring in a guy, especially when he's playing on your third line, it's very difficult to deal with that player just basically playing to the level of whatever is deep 100 feet below mediocrity. And I think that the last 2 games, you're starting to see the tide shift with him. Now, granted, it's 2 games, but I think especially in the game against Philly, and a listener, I believe it was on YouTube, brought up a great point. They said that with Sheary and really a lot of these guys on the team, you saw a lot of them significantly more relaxed than you probably did a week ago. And maybe something with the trade deadline passing that could have played, you know, a part in that. And so my response to that is, and I'm not discounting it, I'm just saying for a guy like Sheary who was brought in here over the regular season, he was signed. You know, it wasn't like there was talk all year that he was going to get moved. As much as some of us wished it into existence, I don't think that was ever something that was actually legitimately going to happen with Connor Sheary. My thing with that is, unless the Lightning at some point had a conversation with him and said, you know, we just brought you in and that's great and we love having you here, or whatever I'm very much just freestyling this. But, you know, them saying, but we will be open to possibly moving you in the future. Now, I don't know if that's an actual conversation that's happened. I haven't heard anything from the people that I know that would know about those certain conversations. So my question, or I guess my counter argument to that statement about, certain individuals on this team being more relaxed now was, if being moved was never in the cards, what was the issue? Because with Connor Sheary, I think it just, sometimes guys just, they don't fit into a system. They don't fit into a new atmosphere. And it was very surprising, and it's been very surprising still to see Sheary struggle as much as he has, given the organizations he's played for prior. He won 2 cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins in the midst of them being a dynasty, and yes, they were a dynasty. I don't care what anyone says, that those Pittsburgh Penguins teams were some of the best teams of the 2000s, probably the mid 2000s as well. I mean, they're definitely probably top 10. Along with the back-to-back champion Tampa Bay Lightning. And then he goes and plays, I think he played like 2 years in Washington. And Washington's a very strange organization. They're never really rebuilding, but they're also never really winning. And I think when you look at Connor Sheary now and you try to get a gauge on what he did right, or where he could possibly be trending, I look at the goal he scored against Philly, and I didn't really watch him that whole much in Washington. I watched him a ton when he was in Pittsburgh, so I will say that I had flashbacks to Connor Sheary during his time with Pittsburgh. Now, are we going to get that Connor Sheary? Probably not. I mean, we'll get probably flashes of it like we did against Philly. I will say, if we could get maybe one vintage Connor Sheary highlight offensively from him from his Pittsburgh days once a game, even if it doesn't result in a goal, I think that is enough to consider him going on a run, because that version of Connor Sheary is going to help this team significantly down the road. And I think that is a version of Connor Sheary that we could live with. And I think it's a version of Connor Sheary that will allow other players on this team to get going. The ones that are already going already. I mean, there's other players as well. The Brandon Hagels, the Nick Pauls, the Anthony Cirellis, even Tanner Jeannot, if he comes back and he stays healthy. I think that having Duclair and you start to get more production out of Sheary, and then obviously you get your normal characters doing what they got to do or doing what they normally do. Cooch, Point, Hagel, you get Stamkos playing a little better. I think that once players all around start to play better, it's going to alleviate a lot of pressure. And you saw that against Philly, just how well everybody played. And that was large in part to do because they were relaxed, and vice versa. It was because, they played well. They were relaxed because they were playing well, and they were playing well because they were relaxed. So it's really a double-edged sword. And it's also something you see in every other sport. Guys don't play well, they're going to start playing tight. They're going to try and start forcing things, and that never works. And so Connor Sheary, I think, like I said, if we could get probably a third of what he did in Pittsburgh, I think he and the Tampa Bay Lightning are in good shape down the stretch. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about that. Did you see the same thing, or do you still need to see more out of him? Quite frankly, I still need to see more out of him as well. But if I had to make a decision right now, I think that his last 2 games have kind of signaled that something is positive on the horizon for Connor Sheary. And speaking of the horizon, coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about the pretty much almost insurmountable odds that the Lightning have in front of them in the schedule. A ton of tough matchups coming as they continue to try and stay in that wild card spot and build upon that and push the other teams back behind them. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our last sponsors of today's show, and that is our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. Level it up to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed. We're also in audio form. We're also on YouTube, so subscribe to the channel there. And drop a comment below. How you feeling about this Lightning team, as well as, the stretch that they got ahead of them. So we've talked about it quite a bit on this show as to how really the big test coming up for the Lightning will be Thursday, Saturday, and next Tuesday, and that is the Rangers, Panthers, and Golden Knights. And then they kind of get a little bit of a reprieve. They play San Jose the following game after they're in Vegas. They're in LA against the Knights, who are a tough team, a team that you definitely can't take lightly. I'm pretty sure that the Kings are still in the thick of it out in the West in terms of battling for a playoff spot. And then after that, you have the Ducks, who are pretty much a lottery team. But then you come back, and as we all know, West Coast trips could be super, super grueling. And they have the privilege of playing against the Boston Bruins. And then followed off by that to end the month of March is the Islanders. So it's going to be a very interesting stretch to end the month of March. And then right after that, you got 3 out of your next 4 games to start April are against division rivals. You're in Detroit, and then you're in Canada for a back-to-back against the Leafs and the Canadiens. And depending on how they play, as well as how maybe some of these other teams might play, they might be in the thick of it with Detroit. They might be head-to-head with Pittsburgh or the Islanders. So it's really going to be a make-or-break road trip and just stretch in general for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. So as it kind of stands right now, the Lightning are first in the wild card in the Eastern Conference, 2 points ahead of the Islanders and the Red Wings, and they're about 8 points behind the Maple Leafs. I don't expect them at this point in time to catch the Leafs. Who knows if the Lightning could get maybe on a 4-game winning streak or something like that, and the Leafs drop 1 or 2 within that time. Any old bets are off, but you know what? I'm just focused right now on, as they should be too, on just keeping a hold on that number 1 wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. And even if they play well, and they play well enough to stay at the top of the number 1 wild card after the Penguins, you got some rugged teams waiting for you after that Penguins game. You got Columbus, you got Ottawa. You're on the road for your last road game of the year against Washington. And then you wrap things up against the Sabres and the Leafs. And it's a very... I always hate the last month of the season because I always feel like the Lightning are kind of almost hanging off a cliff regardless of where they are in the standings, whether, when they used to finish second behind the Bruins in the division, and then the last couple of years behind the Leafs. It's been one of those things. I always feel like they're hanging on by one finger off the edge of a cliff, and it's not so much their fault. Obviously, there's been so much talked about the fatigue with this team, but obviously, I think this year is a different story. I think they're in full on underdog mode, and I kind of hope that they don't lose concentration, because that's the biggest thing with this team that I think that they have had issues with this year. Before the deadline, it was all about we're missing this, we're missing that, and that's understandable. But now that they have Duclair and Dumba, two very solid pickups that I think that will help them, and especially Dumba, who will fill in until we get Sergachev, whenever that might be. You have two guys who are kind of going to hold it down and help everybody around them get better. And my hope is, though, after some of these long stretches off, or even some of these short stretches off, especially after that West Coast trip, you really got to buckle down from game to game. We can't have performances like we did last week against Calgary, where you're coming off a very good win against a Montreal team that's tough, regardless of how you feel about them according to their standing in the Eastern Conference. And then you just get embarrassed at home against Calgary, and now it kind of looks like almost, or at least I have fear that history is going to repeat itself. You pick up a great win at home against the Flyers. Looks like everything's back on track. And then you're going up against a team like the Rangers. Now, obviously, the complete opposite of what the Flames are. But still, the scenario is still the same. You have all these days off. And really, that's where concentration comes into play. I spoke about it on yesterday's episode as well, is that it's not only concentration, but it's also, and I guess this goes hand in hand with them, with concentration, is that they really need to figure out what they did right from that Flyers game. And I think they did. I think they did enough in that game that you could kind of say, okay, A, B, and C worked, and we could carry that over. We don't have to worry about all that other fluff. All that other fluff is going to come when we do A, B, and C, or whatever the case may be. And that's the same thing with the Rangers. They're a team that's playing well right now. Their goaltending situation is a little weird. They just had a shutout win tonight. Igor Shesterkin had a shutout. And, you don't know who you're going to get from them, whether it be Quick, whether it be Shesterkin. If I had to bet money, it's probably going to be Shesterkin. And you have to just focus on the game period by period. You can't just say, we need to go out there and do all this and that, and this is how we're going to win the game. No, you need to just take it shift by shift. And really, I've said it before here on the podcast, that's really how they should approach every single game. Just break it down shift by shift. Really just play the long game on that, especially with a team like the Rangers. And then even after that, you have the Florida Panthers. So two teams that are very tough, two teams that can very well win the Cup this year. And the Lightning can't look at it like that, like, oh, these are two top dogs, let's prove ourselves. No, it's just, you got to go out there and win games. And that's how they should approach all these other big teams, as just this big stretch to end the season. So we'll come back tomorrow. Hopefully you guys will drop some comments and questions on our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. If you want to tweet to me some questions, you could do that as well. Danky Dank, DENKYD8NK. If you want to drop a comment or a question on our YouTube page, go ahead, do it below this video and hit that thumbs up button. It helps the video grow, and it helps us reach more fans or potential fans of the podcast. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.